I'm Nicole Rycroft. I'd like to thank Shelley, David, and the team at the Walrus for this invitation. As you may have gleaned from my bio, I'm a professional tree hugger, and so I will be exploring innovation through the lens of conservation and the scale of change that we need. Now, normally I would preempt my comments by giving a warning that you need to reset your internal Siri language setting to Australian, but given that we're in Whistler, I'm probably on pretty safe ground. So, as we all know, our society is grappling with two major environmental issues, climate change and the sixth mass extinction. Both are enormous challenges, both are anthropogenically driven, and both are resolvable. Reversing climate change and halting species decline are critical societal innovations. I'm going to talk about the art of possibility and how we go about actually making both of these innovations happen. The problems before us is that humanity, we consume too much, too fast, and we're consuming the wrong kinds of things. It's taking a toll, and this is the space, the critical space, where innovation can play a key role. None of us, obviously, want orangutans or caribou to go extinct, but for most of us, the scope of the challenge, the scope of the change that's needed, it feels too big in scope or out of our control. You know, we no longer make the cloth to sew our own clothes. We go to stores and we buy what's available to us. And so the companies, if the companies that are providing us with cars are only making ones that use fossil fuels, or the clothing that we buy comes from endangered forests, then our scope of choice and options feel limited. The economic and the supply chain systems behind our consumption are complex, and oftentimes they feel impenetrable. But here's the beauty of things in my mind. If we can imagine a different reality, then it means that solutions are actually within the realm of possibility. And that is the scope of the work that we have ahead of all of us to work together towards. So I think what we need to also understand is that innovation, for innovation to take place, then behavioral change is a critical element. So who here has developed a New Year's resolution? Really, not many people. Look at that. Okay, so generally people that develop New Year's resolutions, they've kind of committed to a positive change. So those folks that develop New Year's resolutions or personal goals for themselves, pop up your hands again. Okay, and for those that have never broken a New Year's resolution or a personal goal, keep your hand up. Yeah, okay, there's not many that are left. Yeah, behavioral change is a really difficult thing. And so try and imagine changing the behavior of 7 billion people that we share this planet with. It's a losing proposition. But what we can do is change. We can change, if I move back. David Leonard, do you have control of this as well? There we go, look at that. I love David. But what we can do is we can change the behavior of 500 to 1,000 key executives that control the purchasing decision of the companies that we buy our books, our cars, our magazines, our newspapers from. There is a truth in the old adage that the customer is always right. And for suppliers of palm oil or paper, their large corporate customers are key. Large publishers or clothing brands help to create the imperative to change practices, to stop logging in endangered species habitat, and to invest in the R&D of those truly sustainable alternatives that we need to come online. And this in turn drives change upstream to policy decision makers in government, who then bring about regulations and protect special places like the Great Bear Rainforest. And downstream, what it does is it puts environmental solutions into the hands of all of us that are individual consumers. If we want innovations to shift the dial on habitat loss and deforestation, there has to be an incentive to stop the status quo. And there has to be a champion to actually move in that direction. And contrary to, I know with Whistler's history, the Olympics loom large, contrary to the Olympics, where everybody wants to be first across the line, quite often in the world of sustainability, nobody wants to be too far off the pace, but it's an incredible risk. There are a few leaders that are willing to take that risk, to step into the realm of the unknown, and to be the first to step ahead of the pack. I'm going to spend just a little time looking at one early champion in the sustainability world. Raincoast Books, a BC publisher, proudly so. In the world of book publishing, it really doesn't come much bigger than Harry Potter. There's the Bible, but even that's debatable, whether it's bigger. And in the mid-2000s, when Raincoast was publishing the 5th in the Harry Potter book series, there were no book papers that were available for them to print on that were free of endangered forest fiber. But what we knew was that the Potter contract was lucrative enough that it would incentivize mills to develop eco-papers. And so we worked with Raincoast Books to put the challenge out to mills to develop 100% recycled paper. Recognizing that, first innovators tend to pay more, Raincoast were willing to absorb the additional cost and put the challenge out to mills to produce the eco-paper, recognizing that when it was done at an economy of scale that a contract the size of Harry Potter would enable, that other publishers would then be able to engage. And that with publishers engaging, that would then trigger a cycle that would then lead to more demand, greater economy of scale, and more affordable papers. And that's exactly what happened with Harry Potter. Not only did millions and millions of children have an environmental solution in their hand, there were 40 new papers that were developed that were environmental. Those papers are still available today. And it revolutionized the way that publishing was done internationally. So Harry Potter is one example of a global supply chain that was transformed by one publisher taking the financial risk at one end of the supply chain, and then a mill that was willing to take the risk of developing a paper for just one publisher for one book on the assumption that other publishers would then also come in and buy that paper. But those are key elements, as Peter mentioned, taking risk, key elements for innovation. But once those foundational blocks are in place, then change can happen relatively quickly. Business is entrepreneurial. Once there's a clear incentive, then business can actually move very fast. And so as a single company, it can actually be impossible to drive change, no matter how committed you are to actually making your supply chain and your environmental practice different. There is a need for peers and even competitors to become colleagues to enable this broader sustainability shift. And there is real power in collective action. We're just going to quickly look at the change that's taking place currently in the clothing industry in the shift to remove endangered forests from our rayon fabrics. Now, rayon, it's not necessarily a well-known fact that rayon is actually made from trees. In fact, it's made from 120 million trees every year, and that number is slated to more than double within the next decade. What has been a great innovation or invention for fabrics has come at an incredible toll to Indonesia's orangutans and Canada's boreal. And Canopy has created partnerships with more than 69 brands to eliminate the use of endangered forests from rayon fabrics and to kickstart commercial scale production of alternatives that support a circular economy. So those brands include global giants like H&M, Lululemon, Stella McCartney, sort of like a broad industry initiative. And with these brands collectively engaged, we have garnered commitments from rayon producers that represent 70% of the supply chain in just a 3-year period. And that's a remarkable change in a relatively short period of time. 70% of that supply chain is undergoing this transformation. Now, both the publishing industry as well as the fashion industry are working to improve their own environmental footprint as individual brands. They're working to transform their supply chain, and they're also contributing beyond the kind of boundaries of their normal corporate business to help safeguard landscapes of hope like the Great Bear Rainforest. Now, the Great Bear Rainforest, most of us are familiar with it, a spectacular landscape that earlier this year, 85% of it was set aside from logging and formally protected. And that result would have been impossible without the collective engagement of customer companies in the marketplace, engaging the government as well as the logging companies to change business as usual in that area. We can imagine a world where clean energy supplies our homes. We can imagine a world where the books that we read and the clothing that we wear comes from sustainable sources. But sometimes between our imagination and the realization of that vision, there can be a wall. You know, sometimes it can be a Donald Trump-sized wall that seems insurmountable at the time. But let's not be thrown off by that. We are scaling that wall, and call it innovation or call it evolution, call it supply chain transformation. Others may be making this decision, but they're making these decisions, these changes in practice, because we care and because we're engaged. Thank you.